Welcome to Screen Therapy. I'm your host, Jason Schreurs. In October of 2018, I found myself in the hospital, sitting across from a psychiatrist who was telling me that I was bipolar. I was released with a bunch of medication and laid on the couch for about a week. I had my iTunes library on shuffle, trying to shake the hornet's nest from my head. Ever since I was a kid, I've been using music for therapy and as a way to escape. Punk rock and mental health have always been connected. This podcast looks at that connection through the lens of different guests. This is Screen Therapy.
Nothing, and there was most of us raised in unemployment line, ruins the domestic crime. Always against the odds, fought with the underdogs.
Jonny Boucher of Hope for the Day lost his friend Mike Scanlon to suicide in 2010. When Mike took his life, Jonny lost a mentor and a friend, someone that worked alongside him in the music industry. Sadly, Mike was the 9th of 16 people that Jonny has lost to suicide. He had to take action, so he left his work promoting shows and formed Hope for the Day, an organization that educates people about suicide prevention. As suicide rates grow, now more than 800,000 people die at their own hands each year. Jonny's organization has spoken about suicide prevention to more than 15,000 people in 2019 alone. The message spreads, and Jonny's hope is that we can prevent as many people as possible from feeling like they have no other choice. Suicide is a preventable disease. If only we could get around the stigma of mental illness and blow open the doors in this conversation.
Against the odds, what with the underdogs?
Hey, I'm Jonny Boucher from Hope for the Day. We're a proactive suicide prevention and mental health education charity here in Chicago, Illinois. And before I started Hope for the Day in 2011, I was an independent concert promoter from the age of 13. I'm 35 now, but I grew up in the Chicago punk rock and hardcore scene. And music was always my safe space, and beyond putting on shows, it became a way of making money. But unfortunately, in 2010, my boss, Mike Scanlon, jumped from his 5th floor balcony here in the city of Chicago and kind of rocked my world. Mike was always I always say he was my Robin Williams. He was always the guy that wanted to have a laugh and had a good time and masked a lot of the things that unfortunately ultimately made him take his own life. But Mike taught me a lot. We did a lot of big concerts and festivals in our short time together. But I wanted to do something to honor Mike's life because I realized Mike was number 9 on a list of 16 people that I've personally lost to suicide. And the one common denominator between everybody that I've lost is that no one wanted to talk about it. So after Mike took his life, I decided that we needed to start talking about it a lot more. And that's why our goal at Hope for the Day is empowering the conversations on proactive suicide prevention through outreach and mental health education. So our goal is to simply just meet people where they're at, to let them know it's okay not to be okay, which is our copywritten tagline.
Can you give me a sense of where Mike was at, leading up to his suicide?
Yeah, we were kicking ass, and Mike was in his early 40s, very successful, recently married after, kind of living a life of, some demons, promiscuous relationships, alcohol abuse, drug abuse. But ultimately, he, like me, thrived off of giving people a safe space at concerts to just kind of let go and get away from life for a couple hours. And we turned it into a business. But Mike was masking a lot of things, like a lot of people do, unfortunately. And it ultimately drove him to feel like the only place that he was to go was to jump off of his balcony, the one that the Chicago Tribune wrote about months prior because it was so extravagant. And he was such a hustler and bustler of the city of Chicago.
Yeah, you touched on a quote that you like to use on your website. And the quote is, "If we are going to be proactive about mental health, we must meet people where they are and not where we expect them to be."
Yeah.
So can you expand on that?
I'm not a mental health expert. People call me an expert all the time. And we at Hope for the Day, we're all peer-led and peer-based, but we are clinically backed. So we do have a bunch of clinicians that sign off on our education workshops and really validate, the kick-ass work that we do. But my whole theory was, kind of how I, started doing punk rock and hardcore shows. The mentality, if they build it, they will come, was really the truth for the misfits and the people who weren't, the jocks and stuff like that, like me, and also the people that were like the jocks that wanted to, get rough in the mosh pit, So for everything and anything that I've ever done, it's always been about bringing people together. And our theory at Hope for the Day of meeting people where they're at is simply just saying, like, listen, mental health for so long has so much shamed people for certain things and certain lifestyles and blame that for why people take their life. And I'm a firm believer that we can work with alcohol and we can talk about AA in bars. We can talk about the uncomfortable conversations, just like we've made it become a conversation for Gamblers Anonymous and whatnot. People go to concerts all the time to get away from things. So what better way to interact with people than let them know that, hey, this isn't, if you're depressed, call this number. This is, hey, what's this it's okay not to be okay thing stand for? What's Hope for the Day? Can you tell me more? And then when you tell them, they're so vulnerable because they've been able to escape for a little bit that they are like, wow, that's amazing. My life's been impacted this way, or maybe I've struggled, or wow, thank you for that. I know someone who could use these resources. So our goal of just meeting people where at not, where they expect them to be allows them to feel much more comfortable when approaching the conversation we feel. And it's just so important that we don't corner people when we have to have a conversation around mental health. It's that we circle around them and we give them support to open and feel as free as they can so they can articulate what they're going through. Because if we don't give them that space, how are we going to be able to know, one, what is causing the pain, and two, what can we do to help?
Stigma is such a barrier for mental health. How do you feel about the punk scene and stigma there? Is it lesser than mainstream society?
I think that the punk rock and hardcore scene has always had this mentality of, if there's a problem in the world, we can talk about it. So I feel like there is not necessarily a stigma around talking about wellness and mental well-being, because that's how I found out about being vegan, was just like walking one of my shows and I was like, oh cool, we gave the little record pop-up spot right there, that's cool. And then all of a sudden, like, what's this vegan cookie? How is this vegan? What makes this different? All right, what are the health benefits? Oh, holy shit. And then all of a sudden, a long time down the road, here I am. I'm 35 years old and proud to have a nice grill in my backyard, but know that I'm a vegan and that's how I use it. So I think that there's not that stigma. I think the stigma, though, around still aggressive music, the tough guy and, individual mentality is still there. But it's also because, I feel like my friends in the Acacia strain always talk about, we need this as an outlet. So get it out, let it out. But don't let it be this thing that makes you put up a front and act like you're tougher than you really are, because who the fuck are you trying to fool other than yourself?
Do you miss working in the music industry?
I miss it in a sense because I miss the thrill, the excitement, the challenge of being like, all right, how do we sell a show out? How do we get this tour off the ground? But I transitioned a lot of my work from the concert promotion and artist management world right into Hope for the Day, because so much that we started off doing, when we first started, was just partnering with all my friends that were in bands and saying, hey, can we utilize your platform? And that's how we became one of the most impactful charities on the Vans Warped Tour, was because we were the only charity that consistently had someone going up and telling people, yo, if you're struggling, enjoy this time and take advantage of this time while you're here with your community and talk to us over at the Hope for the Day tent. We did a bang-up job on that tour, from 2014 until it ended last year. And that allowed me to still have my like, oh, cool, we still are working in music, because we did so much internationally with bands through touring. But again, we're still a mental health organization. But we would do concerts all the time. We would do like really fun things to, we brought like a band from the UK over one time I found out they were breaking up. I'm like, you guys have never played, the States. I can find cheap tickets from London to Chicago. We could do this at this venue. They're like, dude, no one's going to come. We announced it and it sold out in a day. And I was like, there you go. So it's just that gamble's there, but I just like doing it for a good cause now.
Did lots of punks confide in you at the booths?
Oh yeah, absolutely. we kicked ass out there. And then, we were able to build some other partnerships with other festivals around the country and around the world, because we were always so easy to talk to. And the Vans Warped Tour, I personally spoke over 1,200 times in the 6 years that we were a part of that tour. So when you're constantly hearing this message, and then all of a sudden, your tent is front and center, like, because we would work with the tour on just giving it, accessibility, but then also working with the tour on providing mental health education workshops too. I mean, we just did this over the top job that allowed us to not only be very effective fan facing, but we were very effective behind the scenes, because Warped Tour was at some points traveling with 700 to 800 people on the tour as far as production goes, with bands and nonprofits and all this other shit. So it's like, that's a community. That's a moving community. And there was a lot of hardships that we'd have to face within that community that I'm grateful that we had a seat at the table, but also could help navigate and mitigate some of the hardship of having those conversations, and just allow people to know it's okay not to be okay, and that we can talk about these things. But there were some, there are definitely a lot of things that I thought I was going to do in my music career that I was able to accomplish at a young age in my life. But, there's still always the desire to nurture them this way, because I feel that it's more effective and I can do more for others other than just serve myself with this platform.
Tell me about when you first got into punk and how that affected you.
So, okay, I can't have a conversation about how I got into punk without how I got into hip hop. So at the age of 7, I had already gone to a Garth Brooks concert. I had already gone to a couple other like country western acts.
Ooh.
Oh, I know. My mom's from northern Wisconsin and my dad's from Peoria, Illinois. So like my dad came with the soul, funk, R&B, and my mom came with the country. And their powers combined, my very first concert was Garth Brooks, 1989 Thunder Rolls tour. But my sister actually exposed me, because I got like a Walkman, and I just had my parents' favorite artist CDs. I really didn't have a say in anything. And then my sister bought Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, and the day it came out, and so she's like, "I'm going to listen to this new CD." And I was like, "Oh, word! All right, well, I want to listen to it as well." So she went downstairs or something, and I listened to it, and I was like, "This is so raw. What the hell is this?" So I ended up stepping on the jewel case and telling them that I broke the CD and I already threw it out. And I'm sorry, but we'll get you another one. And that night I went in my room and I listened to the unexplicit version of Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style front to back. And I was just amazed by what I heard, because I'd never heard anything like that. But also it allowed me to be like, you know what? There's life outside of this country music. And I'm so honest about this, but then I started scamming Columbia House and BMG, where you could like order 20, CDs and just pay for shipping. I scammed the shit out of those things when I was like 9 and 10 years old. When I was in 5th grade, I had a Case Logic CD holder that was the most diverse music collection any kid probably had at that time, because I was still only 10 years old, right? And that is where I found my love for heavy metal. That's where I found my love for a lot of the grunge that was out there. And then also the crazy amount of hip hop that I was falling in love to. Because then I started understanding like the backgrounds of all of this, which then allowed me to go, yo, I'm going to this thing called Ozfest. All these like cool metal bands, but yo, this band Hatebreed. Yo, this band Deftones, that were like opening my eyes to different things that ultimately got me into punk and hardcore, that I'm just so grateful for, because I went from Hatebreed into anything and everything that I could get my hands on, from 88 Finger Louie to Apocalypse Hoboken, to then Dillinger Escape Plan, to Bane, to American Nightmare, to just everything. I just had this universal view on music. And I'm just so grateful for it, because I feel like I kind of like stumbled upon it, but my parents really embraced it. And that's why when I was 13, my parents were like, "You want to start putting on shows?" I was like, "Hell yeah." And I started putting on shows then, and just kept falling in love in community and local scenes all around the country, which, led me to do a lot of shows before I even played in my own bands for a short time period. But then I realized that if I was going to really do anything with this, I would have to get into the bigger picture of bigger festivals and stuff like that, which punk rock wasn't really. We're just seeing punk rock really be valued on a big grand stage, now in the modern day. But back in the late 90s, I mean, it was still, you're talking about your Fireside Bowl, you're talking about the Arlington Heights Knights of Columbus Hall here in Chicago. Like, those were like the nostalgic venues that when you look at show flags, you're like, no fucking way that band played with that other band on that stage for 150 people. Bullshit.
Yeah, that's cool. One of the things that I found after my diagnosis was looking back at some of the music that I grew up on and realizing how real it was about mental health, like suicidal tendencies. I mean, those guys are, they're going through a lot of stuff. And at the time, I just thought, oh, this is shock value, right? Did you have anything like that in regards to looking back and seeing songs about suicide or mental illness?
There were definitely a couple tracks that like I leaned into. I also was like a huge Smashing Pumpkins fan right when Melancholy came out. That side, I really dove into Nirvana when I was younger too. So like, I think that I was like always around it. But then when I got into punk rock and hardcore, it kind of magnified it. So when I would go back to those albums, I would go, holy shit, this is really what they were talking about. It's like anything in life. If you think about it, 20, 30 years ago, we weren't thinking about these things in general, but you go and listen to any Soundgarden record, you're like, holy shit, this was real. Chris Cornell and his feelings were very real. Back in the day, they were talking about this, yet this is still a fucking problem for our society to talk about. So why do we have to lean just on the artists to pour their hearts out and then ultimately possibly take their own life or live a life of filling void with drug and alcohol abuse? I mean, there's so many things, but we learn from artists so much. I mean, look what comedians do for us. They make us laugh at the most rotten shit in the world, but we laugh at it because they said it. And that's what we're all just waiting for. Someone to fucking say this shit so we can all go, yeah, I've been thinking the same way. That's the issue for mental health. But I felt that the sense of community and struggle and survival within your community was a message that was very, very fluid within punk rock and hardcore. I understood a lot more because of my desire and my sense for community growing up in general.
On the website, it says 120 people each day. Why do you think suicide rates have gotten so high?
Well, one, because, we know more. I know that when we started Hope for the Day in 2011, there wasn't a whole lot of accessibility to current suicide data, more, mental health trends like there are now. But on top of that, we're so much more connected. So we're going to be hearing about things more and more, which means that we might be unfortunately influenced in that manner or think that that's the only possible solution because of our online presence and how we're very, very open and exposed society now. But I've always also said, I think this shit's been going on for a long time. And until we got to a place where it was appropriately recorded and we've been living, in the same dark corner that cancer was, and that HIV was at one point in time. These are all these things were hiding in these corners, impacting our lives, but we didn't know what we knew about it or what we know about them now until someone got fucking fed up and said, enough's enough. I'm over this shit. I'm going to bring some light on this. And that, to me, is punk rock as fuck.
And you being out there and educating people on the stage before the shows, 15,000 people approximately. How does that make you feel?
It was cool. I mean, I always lived by this mentality that I still do today is that it's not about me, it's about we. And if you take yourself out of it, you just make it so much easier to talk to people because essentially it's utilize your voice. One thing I learned the hard way in the music industry was, how much people were, screwing you over for money. And it was just like a cutthroat industry. And I was like, that's not why I love music. I love music for the community aspect of it. And that's why our ROI at Hope for the Day is human impact. The more people we educate, the more people we get resources to, the more we can enable people to be proactive in their own communities, because that's what we need to do in society. So there's so much more value brought to my life going this route and nurturing others, because the same conversation that we have done on many tours in the US, we started doing at the same time in places like Europe. So being able to again utilize music as the tool to connect folks with resources or just a sense of well-being that you can have a fucking string of bad days but pick yourself back up, just like falling in the fucking mosh pit, right? Like we need to look out for everyone when they fall down, but when we fall down, we also need to be able to say, hey, help me up. It's really a two-way street. So I feel that it's so much more nourishing to my soul and our team's soul to know that the work we do makes real impact.
What are some of the bands in your circle that talk about this stuff that could help people that go to the shows?
Well, the thing is that we've really created a nice platform to plug and play and allow anybody who wants a seat at the table to be involved. So we've worked with so many different bands, from the Gaslight Anthem before they popped as a big band. We worked with the guys in like Neck Deep, State Champs. We've worked with so many fucking bands, to be completely honest. But the thing is that any of them, local or international, anybody that steps up to the plate and utilizes their opportunity when they're able to play shows to say, yo, we work with this organization called Hope for the Day. Some of you may not know who they are, but they're here to let you know that wherever you are in your journey, it's okay not to be okay. So we have some mental health resources that are available at our table. Like, that takes fucking courage, right? But like, I remember working with Jonathan Davis from Korn on his speech. It was just so profound because I grew up also a fan of Korn, and I was like, whoa, this dude's asking me for what he should say right now. But then same thing happens with our friend Waka Flocka, the rapper, from Atlanta. Like, his brother died by suicide. So like, we've had this conversation, but it doesn't, matter who it's doing it. It's how passionate they've done it. And so that's why, I look at like the guys in the band Mastodon who did, a very courageous thing, not only for the organization, but for their community. They did a special show with us at the Metro in 2017. That was a massive underplay and played Crack the Sky, a lot of people's favorite album. But then they really took the time to make sure that they address the things that are going on and why they were on the stage that night, not just to their fans, but to ignite the fans to go out and give that same message to anybody in their sphere of influence that may be having a fucking rough go at life.
Totally, yeah. And the story there with Mastodon, I think it was one of the members' sister that committed suicide.
Braun, their drummer, his sister Sky, which Crack the Sky is all about his sister. She completed at a young age, and they definitely had a lot to learn from that. But it was very, very eye-opening, and I had the opportunity actually to go down to his house in Atlanta and film with him and just learn more about what it was like to live with, and then all of a sudden without your sister, who was pretty much your partner in crime. But Crack the Sky pays homage to her as well as to anybody who's, been impacted or struggled. And, just a great example. But, there's so many amazing bands that we've been able to partner with in the pop punk and the emo world. They just get the keys and they drive. And it's cool because I feel like I'm able to not just have amazing friends, but friends who can take a very simple moment out of their show, whether Hope for the Day's in the room or not, and make some fucking impact and talk about things that everybody's just wishing that we could talk about more openly and easily, to just realize that we're all human beings and we all eat, sleep, shit, and cry, really.
And you've got some great ideas for prevention. Can you expand on those as well?
Yeah. We understand that in society, and I think that 2020 is really shining a light on it, that wherever you are in the world, you're able to poke holes at maybe the education you were given, or the lack of education that you were given growing up, and some of the unfortunate cultural and societal stigmas that we've lived within, So one of them is just like the lack of education around mental health. So for us, we really feel that you can't give something you don't have. And we weren't able to really put a finger on a great program that we could say, hey, we want to partner with. So we just had to create it. And so we have peer-led but clinically backed 1 hour, 4 hour, and 8 hour mental health education and workshops that are, available to the public and, all walks of life. And there's a lot of appropriate ones for the military. We have a great program for the military folks, whether you're active or you're a veteran. We have a great program for the food and beverage industry. And we're also working on one for the LGBTQ community. And the reason is just because there's been such a lack of proper education when it comes to mental health that we just decided that this is the best tool to give to communities, because, again, we can get people educated and then they can go be that one to start the conversation. And we live in a world where, you educate one, you can educate a million, but it's just about being able to make it digestible. And when we're talking about a very scary subject like mental health and suicide, it's hard to talk about. And we recognize that. We still have our days on our own for our staff, but we know that the more we talk about, the more we realize that we're not fucked up, crazy, or insane. We're all human beings going through a thing called life. So if that's a great entry point, then that's awesome, because there's a lot of people, young and old, who haven't been told that they can talk about their feelings. They can be open about it, because you and I, we live with the stigma that, boys don't cry. I say, bullshit, I cry all the fucking time. But because of that stigma, people have held back. So for us, it's just, if we can get education into someone's hands, that's great. But we're very aggressive. We try to get in front of as many people as possible. We do a lot of murals. We do a lot of collaborations with artists and food companies. And we also have our coffee shop in Chicago, Sip of Hope, that is a safe space. It's open 7 days a week, but it's also filled with resources right then and there, right when you open the door, not when you walk all the way through to the bathroom. And it's because we know that, mental health should be accessible, just like getting a cup of coffee. And we have really good coffee too. So it's the world's first coffee that 100% of the proceeds support suicide prevention and mental health education. But it gives us an opportunity to meet people where they're at, just like the way that we work with the alcohol industry, we work with the non-alcoholic industry in the same way. But we're the only mental health organization that's out there releasing beers around the country to let people know that, hey, you can have a string of rough days, but you can also talk about it. And if you need to have a beer while you talk about it, then have this beer. The beers we have, they have how to talk, numbers and resources on it. I mean, it's just a real bang up job, but it's still also an easy way to talk about the conversation. We just really believe that however we can just activate that conversation, then it's up to us to then figure out what's the next route to get person the resources and the education opportunities that we have, because we got to build that gap that hasn't been fulfilled by society, because unfortunately we've for so long allowed stigma to hold us back instead of actually leaning in and really having the hard conversations that we all deserve.
Mike's suicide is what brought all this on. When he took his life, how did that affect you personally?
I was shook because Mike was the person that I thought I was aspiring to be. But I was more shook because Mike's suicide left me with questions about the other people that I'd lost. And at that point in time, I'd only, like I said, Mike was number 9 on a list of people that I lost to suicide. But one of the people on that list was my Uncle John, and on my mom's side of the family. My Uncle John was my favorite, and I go on record, he's still my favorite. I don't care if any of the family members are listening. He was the best one, and it's because he was the real one. And when he took his life, it really opened my eyes to what alcohol could do to somebody. And because he drank himself to death, he was a full-fledged alcoholic, and he wasn't good unless he was drunk or if he was on the golf course, which that was one of the other things we loved to do, was play golf. But when Mike took his life, it really opened my eyes. I was like, man, I don't know if there's many people that have been impacted this much. But then my aunt took her life, same thing on my mom's side of the family, shortly after Mike. And unfortunately, the list has just added up. But it's like having the shittiest golf score ever and having to publicly say it all the time. But I'd rather speak up about it than allow myself to live in silence, allow others to live in silence, because when someone takes their life, that's not their whole story. That's unfortunately how it ended. But there's so much else there. And so that's why I feel that it's our life's duty to honor our experiences. And I have see something, say something tattooed on my left hand, and it's because I was just done seeing it and not doing anything about it.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Scream Therapy. You can connect with me at soundcloud.com/screamtherapy. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, take care and be well.
If you